Imagine you're 20 years old and your father, the king of a rapidly expanding military superpower, has just been assassinated. You immediately execute your potential rivals to secure the throne. Then you spend the next 12 years marching 11,000 miles across mountains, deserts, and monsoons, dismantling the largest empire the world had ever seen. Welcome to the life of Alexander III of Macedon. Undefeated in battle, crowned as a pharaoh and a living god, he lived like an epic hero and died at just 32. But was he a visionary unifier or history's most successful, short-tempered megalomaniac? Let's look at the man, the myth, and the massive civil war he left behind. Alexander was born in July 356 BC in Pella, the capital of the ancient kingdom of Macedonia. His father was King Philip II, a brilliant military modernizer who turned Macedonia from a chaotic backwater into the dominant power of the Balkans. His mother was Olympias, a fiercely ambitious princess from Epirus, who was initiated into a snake-worshipping mystery cult and reportedly slept with serpents in her bed. Talk about parental pressure. Olympias doted on the young prince, constantly telling him that his true father was not Philip, but the king of the gods, Zeus, and that his ancestry traced back directly to Achilles. Meanwhile, his father Philip was a walking war machine, covered in severe scars from near-constant campaigns. Alexander watched Philip win victory after victory, and famously lamented to his friends, "My father will leave me nothing of note to do." When Alexander was 10, a horse trader brought a wild stallion to court. It refused to be mounted, and Philip ordered it away. But Alexander noticed something others missed. The horse was terrified of its own shadow. Turning the horse's head toward the sun so it couldn't see its shadow, the 10-year-old easily tamed the beast. An overjoyed Philip kissed his son and cried, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedon is too small for you." That horse, Bucephalus, would carry Alexander all the way to India. To educate this headstrong prince, Philip hired the legendary philosopher Aristotle. For 3 years in the secluded village of Mysa, Aristotle tutored Alexander and his noble peers, including future generals Ptolemy, Cassander, and his lifelong best friend Hephaestion. Aristotle taught them philosophy, medicine, and politics. He also gave Alexander an annotated copy of Homer's Iliad, which Alexander carried on his campaigns and kept under his pillow next to a dagger. However, the two didn't agree on everything. Aristotle taught that non-Greeks were barbarians by nature who should be treated like beasts or plants. But as we'll see, Alexander had other plans. At 16, Alexander was left as regent of Macedonia while his father was away campaigning. He immediately crushed a Thracian rebellion and founded his very first namesake city, Alexandropolis. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated during a wedding ceremony in the old capital of Aegae. At just 20 years old, Alexander assumed the crown and wasted no time. He executed his potential domestic rivals, quickly crushed southern Greek rebellions, and utterly destroyed the rebellious city of Thebes to make an example of them, slaughtering thousands and selling 30,000 survivors into slavery. With Greece temporarily quiet, Alexander set out in 334 BC to complete his father's dream, invading the Persian Achaemenid Empire. He crossed the Hellespont with about 48,000 infantry and over 6,000 cavalry. Stepping onto Asian soil, he flung his spear into the earth, declaring he accepted Asia as a gift from the gods. His first stop? Troy. Alexander garlanded the tomb of his idol Achilles, while Hephaestion paid respects to Patroclus. Then came the military blitz. At the Granicus River, he launched a bold cavalry charge that smashed the Persian satraps. Next, he stopped in Phrygia, where he was shown the legendary Gordian knot. Prophecy said whoever untangled it would rule the world. Alexander took the work smart, not hard approach. He drew his sword and hacked the knot in half. In 333 BC, he faced the Persian king Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus. Exploiting a narrow plain to neutralize Darius's massive army, Alexander charged directly at the king. Darius fled in a panic, leaving his chariot, his weapons, and his entire family behind. Showing surprising magnanimity, Alexander treated Darius's captured mother, wife, and children with absolute royal respect. In 332 BC, Alexander marched south to lock down the Mediterranean coast. When the island fortress of Tyre refused to submit, Alexander spent 7 months building a massive 800-metre land bridge from the mainland ruins to siege the city, eventually enslaving its population. With the coast secured, he entered Egypt, where citizens welcomed him as a liberator from Persian oppression. On November 14th, 332 BC, he was crowned pharaoh in Memphis. He laid plans for Alexandria, which would become the premier city of the ancient Mediterranean. But Alexander wanted answers about his true identity. He made a perilous 3-week journey across the Libyan desert to consult the famous oracle of Amun-Ra at the Siwa oasis. When he arrived, the priest greeted him as the son of Ammon, or Zeus. The oracle reportedly promised him dominion over all mankind. This experience changed Alexander forever. He began to wear the horns of Ammon on his coins and slowly transitioned from a Macedonian warrior king into an absolute autocrat. He returned to Mesopotamia and decisively broke the back of the Persian Empire at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Darius fled again and was eventually assassinated by his own satrap, Bessus. Alexander, now the self-proclaimed King of Asia and King of Kings, gave Darius a royal funeral and hunted Bessus down for execution. But when Alexander captured the grand Persian capital of Persepolis, he let his troops pillage the city. Following a night of heavy drinking, he burned the grand palace of Xerxes to the ground, symbolically avenging Greece, though some ancient accounts imply it was a drunken blunder. As Alexander moved deeper into Central Asia, the romance of the campaign began to sour. He adopted Persian royal robes and began demanding proskynesis, the traditional Persian custom of prostrating or bowing fully before the king. To his Macedonian veterans, who viewed their king as a first among equals comrade, this was a betrayal of their customs. Conspiracies began to bubble up. Alexander's boyhood friend Philotas was accused of knowing about an assassination plot and failing to report it. Alexander had Philotas executed and sent assassins to murder Philotas's father, Parmenion, his most senior, loyal general, to prevent a revenge coup. Then came the tragic banquet of Maracanda in 328 BC. Fueled by unmixed wine, a heated argument broke out between Alexander and Clitus the Black, the general who had saved Alexander's life at the Granicus. Clitus loudly criticised Alexander's Persian dress, his deification, and mocked his accomplishments compared to his father Philip's. Blinded by drunken rage, Alexander grabbed a spear and ran Clitus through. Though he spent 3 days in secluded weeping remorse, the damage was done. He had become a tyrant in the eyes of his men. Soon after, he whipped and executed his royal pages for a hunting dispute and arrested his court historian Callisthenes, Aristotle's nephew, who was subsequently executed. In 327 BC, Alexander married the beautiful Sogdian princess Roxana. While it was a love match, it was also a calculated political alliance to secure the rebellious eastern frontier. Pushing onward into India in 326 BC, Alexander fought his bloodiest battle against King Porus and his war elephants at the Hydaspes River. Though victorious, his beloved horse Bucephalus died shortly after the battle. Alexander founded the city of Bucephala in his honour. But when they reached the Hephaestus River, his exhausted, rain-soaked troops, who had marched 11,000 miles over 8 years, finally mutinied. They flatly refused to go further. Deeply resentful, Alexander powdered in his tent for 3 days before yielding and turning back. The return journey was a nightmare. Alexander marched his men through the brutal Gedrosian desert, resulting in massive casualties among the soldiers and camp followers. Hoping to force cultural unity, Alexander held the Susa weddings in 324 BC, a massive 5-day ceremony where 80 Macedonian officers and 10,000 soldiers were married to Persian noblewomen. Alexander himself married Statira, Darius's daughter, and Parysatis, the daughter of Artaxerxes III. Later that year at Opis, his veteran soldiers mutinied again, furious at the introduction of Persian troops and customs. Alexander arrested and executed 13 ringleaders on the spot. He then stepped onto the platform and delivered a brilliant shaming speech. He reminded them that his father Philip had found them as vagabonds in rags and made them masters of Greece, and that he himself had shared every wound and hardship with them. Tears flowed, and the army begged for his forgiveness. But the king's health was failing, accelerated by the heavy drinking of Macedonian banquets. The death of his closest companion and rumoured lover, Hephaestion, in late 324 BC utterly devastated him. Alexander spent days in weeping isolation and ordered extravagant near-divine honours for his deceased friend. By 323 BC, Alexander was back in Babylon, planning a naval invasion of Arabia. But ominous signs began to stack up. Pythagoras the diviner found a dangerous sign in a sacrifice. Crows fell dead at his feet. A common ass kicked a royal lion to death. And a freed prisoner sat on Alexander's vacant throne, wearing his royal diadem. Shortly after, during a drinking party, Alexander downed a massive bowl of unmixed wine and fell gravely ill with a raging fever. Over 11 agonizing days, his condition worsened. When his anxious soldiers filed past his bed, he was unable to speak, only waving at them with his eyes. On June 11th, 323 BC, Alexander the Great died at the age of 32. When his generals asked on his deathbed to whom he bequeathed his empire, Alexander reportedly croaked, "To the strongest." And boy, did they take that literally. Alexander left behind no adult heir. His son, Alexander IV, was born posthumously to Roxana. Realizing the infant and his disabled uncle Philip III, Aridaeus had no real power, Alexander's generals, the Diadochi, immediately carved up the empire. 40 years of brutal civil wars followed. Cassander eventually had Roxana. Young Alexander IV and his illegitimate half-brother Heracles murdered, extinguishing the ancient Argead dynasty forever. The empire fractured into 3 main successor states: Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Mesopotamia, and Antigonid Macedonia. Though his political empire collapsed instantly, Alexander's cultural impact was permanent. By breaking down the borders between East and West, he ushered in the Hellenistic age. Greek became the international language of trade and literature, and Greek art fused with local traditions as far east as India, creating the beautiful Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara. So was Alexander truly great? He was an unmatched tactical genius, but also a paranoid, short-tempered autocrat whose sudden death plunged his short-lived empire into decades of bloodshed. He conquered the world, but could not conquer his own excesses. Yet, more than 2,000 years later, we are still telling his story. What do you think? Does he deserve the title The Great? Let us know in the comments below.